Now, many conflicts around the world provide lessons as to why military action is not the way to resolve any issue. That's the view of the United Nations Deputy Secretary-General and the organization's highest-ranking woman, Amina Mohammed. Nigerian diplomat sat down in an exclusive conversation with the SABC's Sherwin Bryce-Pease to discuss concerns and objectives as she and the Secretary-General Antonio Guterres are now almost 2 months into their second 5-year term at the helm of the global organization. So they covered a range of topics from the situations in the Ukraine, Ethiopia and Afghanistan to coups in Africa and the narrative around a just transition for developmental states as it pertains to climate change, including taking on the burning question of coal and its future in any energy mix.
Amina Mohammed, welcome back to SABC News.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Let's begin with the news of the day, right? And the largest military build-up in Europe since the Cold War, with some now estimating as many as 190,000 Russian troops on Ukraine's border. The UN Charter is clear that all members shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered. That does not appear to be happening here, no less through the actions of a permanent member of the UN Security Council. What are the stakes at play here from where you are sitting?
They're really high. I mean, it's about conflict. It's about another war. It's about loss of lives and people, mostly I would say women, in trouble. And we find this quite incredible. I don't think in the worst of your imaginations you could think that this would happen in 2022. We've just come out of a pandemic. We know what it is like to be faced with a life-threatening situation. There are many conflicts around the world today that we can take lessons from, that that's not the way that we are going to resolve any issue. We will come back 360 degrees to the table to talk again. So quite incredible that we find ourselves in a place like this, and that all the dialogue, all the engagement, all the diplomacy that is at work is looking as though it's failing, and we're just hoping against hope.
I want to talk a bit about those failures. US Vice President Kamala Harris at the Munich Security Conference over the weekend said Europe faced its most perilous moment since World War II. The UN Security Council is responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security, and yet is incapable of fulfilling that function because Russia has veto powers, which means it can essentially do away with any consensus resolution that might seek to end this escalation. Do you see the rules that govern the Security Council as problematic?
They're a big challenge. We've been trying, I believe member states have been trying to get the reform into the Security Council so that we can continue to be faithful to the Charter. A divided Security Council means that we fail the Charter, and we're seeing that playing out right now. So I think it is imperative that one has a look at what this has taken us towards. Hopefully we do not see a conflict because, as you say, as I say, we hope against hope, to bridge consensus, to remember at the end of the day it is the people that will suffer, and that's what the Charter speaks to. That's the responsibilities of the P5, is to keep this world together, never to know another war again. And yet, look where we find ourselves.
Isn't it not deeply problematic for a council to have this permanent 5 makeup where when a permanent 5 member is a protagonist to a possible conflict, it is rendered incapable of acting?
It's always been the danger of having an exclusive vote without checks and balances that bring you to something like this. I believe this is what member states have been discussing, what member states continue to discuss. And perhaps this is a time at which this incident, this moment in time, will bring us back to a conversation about that veto power, about the construct of the Security Council, and it's upholding the Charter.
The Secretary-General's Common Agenda report launched last year provides a blueprint for a greener, safer and better future, from COVID to climate action, peace and security, women and girls' rights, dealing with the infodemic facing the world, rebuilding trust between communities and governments. A report that aims to, quote, turbocharge work on the SDGs. Doesn't it seem to you that the UN, by producing one report after the other, is essentially just circling the wagon? I would argue you have a Common Agenda report. It was launched in 2015 and it's called the SDGs.
Absolutely. I mean, I was very much part of the team that helped to shape that with the rest of the world, and it was a great set of goals. For the first time, you came together with an integrated agenda that everyone agreed was global, not South, but global. 2015 is a few years ago, and the things that have happened in between 2015 and now, and will happen between today and 2030, require that the UN is alive to those challenges that are stopping us to get ahead with implementing the SDGs. So what our common agenda does is really a review of where we are, why we're off track. The pandemic, of course, has exacerbated it, but we were off track just before then. And what are those reasons that we are perhaps falling behind, losing some of the gains that we've had to move forward? So the common agenda, yes, turbocharges it. It starts to discuss the social contract again. It starts to put at the front of it the financial architecture that is not working to finance the SDGs.
You can't control implementation, though, and that's been a big factor with the targets in the Sustainable Development Goals. This is about the lack of implementation. You said it yourself. So how do you control implementation in this new report?
It's not a control. Like you said, you can't control implementation. You can't control a state.
But that's the problem.
But what you can do is you can look at the enabling environment and say, okay, where is it that we can make moves? Where can we actually do something about it?
Right.
On the financial architecture, you can do something about it. On climate action, you can say to the bank, you've got to have 50% more that's going into adaptation today than you've ever had before. If they're not going to do it, you speak to the governing board until you move. We spoke on the IMF when they had the SDRs, the largest number of SDRs that have ever been issued. Now we're saying that's great, well done, but what are we going to do with them? How can we make sure they're redistributed into places where they really matter and they don't just sit on the shelf? So there are many things that we can do to move this, and many things that perhaps we need to bring to the fore, which you will see in our common agenda, that should accelerate it.
There are multiple conversations happening around the world. In some parts of the world, you're talking about vaccine inequity still, and in some parts of the world, you're talking about moving from a pandemic phase to an endemic phase. Things are starting to open up in places like Europe and the United States. Not quite the case in Africa. Where do we go from here?
No. In Africa, I mean, where we are talking about a lack of vaccines and inequality, what we did see a few days ago was that they're the 6-7 countries that have now been given support to go ahead and look at a preparedness for the next pandemic. For sure, we will have another pandemic, and to see manufacturing for a vaccine, but not just a vaccine that would deal with the pandemic, but what is happening in routine immunization. So again, that turbocharge, because what we've said is that we're not going back to where we were before. We have to accelerate into the future with a better recovery than we've had right now. So in every circumstance, we will be addressing this in ways that will not take us back to 2019 or 2020 for that matter.
And of course it exacerbated what women and girls in our world are facing, right? It's a good segue to talk about the issue of women's rights. Take the Afghanistan context, the DSG, where the Taliban swept back into power last year. You co-wrote later in the Wall Street Journal that girls have an intrinsic right to education, yet reactionary forces warping Islamic teaching too often limit or deny their education. You have taken on this issue not just as the UN's top-ranking woman, but also from the perspective of your own faith. This is a very personal story for you.
Absolutely. I mean, you're DSG in terms of a title and the mandate that you hold, but as a person, I'm a Muslim who is seeing my religion being misinterpreted for women and girls who have a right to education, have a right to seek knowledge, have a right to participate in a society alongside their menfolk. And so, you know, I feel personally very strongly about that. We have the Taliban in power today. We have to continue to engage them, and where they don't have the knowledge, we have to make sure our women have that knowledge and we can be at the table and we can argue that. Now, in the case of Afghanistan, we've got a very complex situation in that we have both an economic crisis and a humanitarian crisis. Mm-hmm. And all the while, we've got to get to help those people, but we have this barrier called the Taliban. And so for us to try to get past that is first to get it right, what we are talking about in terms of women's rights. And it's non-negotiable. Women's rights in Afghanistan, in any other country around the world, and certainly not to put a label on it to tell it that it is because it is Islamic. It is Islam that says that we don't have that right. We absolutely do. In Islam, the most important person is the mother. That's said 3 times by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
I think in many societies and religions, the mother's the most important.
Absolutely.
You recently represented the Secretary-General at the African Union Summit in Ethiopia, a country grappling with an internal conflict where atrocities have been committed by all sides, particularly, again, women and girls, right? You've traveled to some of those conflict regions. What do you want the world to know about what is going on in Ethiopia today?
Well, war is dispensable, and the only victims of war are women. And I've said this over and over again, that they didn't ask for war, yet it is perpetuated on them. And when they come out of it, they are going to take the longest to heal, to be part of the society again, to recover, and will probably have the least investments. And so for me, why war? I mean, why do we go to war? Why don't we look at the root causes, the early warning systems that we have, and have more women involved in some of the peacemaking that needs to happen, the dialogue that needs to happen, include them, because they are certainly going to be at the brunt of that conflict, whatever conflict we have.
Right, and I mean, the issues in Ethiopia or in another terrain, right, the issues are compounded at the end of the conflict when the guns are silenced, as opposed to the issues they were grappling with at the beginning, not so.
We are never better off after a conflict. It takes a generation or more to recover. Conflict after conflict after conflict, and those carrying the burden of that conflict are women.
Let me press you around the issue of net zero emissions by the goal, certainly by 2050, for developmental states in particular. South Africa's Energy Minister, Gwede Mantashe, said earlier this month that coal miners remained an integral part of the country's energy transition. Coal still employs thousands of people in South Africa. The minister says getting rid of coal immediately, like some want us to do, would relegate the country to a fourth world economy. What do you say to that?
No, I don't think so. I think that what happens is that transition and just are 2 important words. And the coal miners should be a central part of that. There is a reskilling to do, there is a new economy to be had, and it is a bright future, particularly for young people. What you have to do with climate action is make it an integral part of the whole. So this is not something you add on. This is not stuck in a silo. This is about jobs. It is about a new economy. Whether you're going to green your energy or your food systems, or that you're going to connect better with technology so that trade becomes also more accessible, and that we have proven that with a green economy there are more jobs to be had than with a brown one. So
in short, the minister's wrong.
I think so.
Fair enough.
Minister.
One of the other major topics, DSG, at the AU summit was the rising number of coups we are seeing in Africa, West Africa in particular, of course, where you're from. You know this part of the world very well. On the one hand, you have the SDGs, the common agenda. On the other hand, you have societies that are fracturing, extremist, terrorist attacks increasing, corruption that is rife, militaries that are often celebrated once the unconstitutional change in power, as we saw in Burkina Faso, happens. The UN Security Council appears averse to sort of get in right when these things are happening. What do we do?
I think we have to go back to the root causes of why these coups are happening. In the past, when a coup happened, it was clearly something that everyone ran indoors and waited to see what was happening out there, and very quickly you looked for a transition. I think communities and society were all of the opinion that the military was not the right way forward, and in many cases our democracies have evolved to relegate the army back to the barracks. To see coups being celebrated in West Africa ought to worry us in a way that we should never imagine, because it means that the breakdown of institutions, the trust in government and its leadership to be able to give people what they require, their basic services, their rights. So there are root causes to this. We need to go back to the institutions of democracy. We need to strengthen them. We need to make sure that those reasons that were prevailing at that time, a lack of governance, a lack of delivery of basic rights, are addressed. And I think we have an opportunity now, because ECOWAS and the African Union, the United Nations, are engaging with those who have committed the coups in transitions. I think it's important in those transitions back to democracy that we have tasks that lead us to strengthening the constitutions and the institutions to where people want to see their rights protected. I think it's very important to pay attention to that.
You said in the Nelson Mandela lecture you delivered in 2017, quote, "Coming from northeast Nigeria, I know that terrorists are not born. They are shaped from an environment that excludes young people, decimates religious teachings and cultural beliefs, converting communities to an ideology of subjugation." 4 years and a bit later, have things improved?
Certainly in the northeast of Nigeria, they have. We've had really good leadership that has been working with security, with communities, speaking to reintegration as quickly as possible. So as you gain ground, you put back in place systems of government and service and security. So it has. In northeast Nigeria and Maiduguri, we've seen huge improvements. However, what we've seen on the other side of the country is an emergence now of a different kind of conflict, where, again, natural resources have become the focus, and a lot of banditry has replaced what we've had in terms of terrorism in northeast to northwest. We are not out of the woods, because in surrounding, Nigeria is, of course, West Africa and the countries where terrorism is still a really big threat. There's a big threat from returned...
West Africa, East Africa, the Horn of Africa. I mean, we could go on.
We could go on, Europe.
Mozambique, Southern Africa, SADC. I mean, this is global.
Europe, Myanmar. I mean, it's a big problem.
How much time do we have?
Not much in the world today to get things right. But I do think still the framing of the SDGs gives us an opportunity to get back on track. It is as relevant as it was in 2015. Our common agenda gives it that wind beneath our wings to get to places that we would otherwise probably not get to if we didn't put particular attention on it. So I'm very hopeful. I'm quite excited about what's in front of us. I think we have got more solutions than we have problems. We just have to deploy them.
And a perfect plug for Elton John's lyrics, right? I think you are the eldest of 5 daughters, later a mother of 6 children, a growing nursery of grandchildren. I'm not sure what the count is right now.
3.
3 so far. A former special advisor to the UNSG, a government minister in Nigeria, Deputy UN Secretary-General, chair of the UN Sustainable Development Group. Now in a second 5-year term, a job that pulls you in one direction to another. There are, of course, 193 National Day events at the United Nations, which also takes up your time because you have to show up. What's on your playlist? What's on your Netflix queue? What do you do to get away from it all and relax?
Star Trek, chocolate, stuff like that. No, I mean, on a very serious note, I think for me it's constantly keeping in touch with people at home. But when I say at home, it's not just my family, it's the people in my village, it's the people across the country, just to remind me why I'm doing what I'm doing, to keep my day and my opportunity to speak to powers very much alive and connected to the real issues on the ground.
DSG, thank you, as always, for making time for us. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Amina Mohammed is the 5th Deputy Secretary-General of the United Nations, beginning her 2nd term along with Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, January 1st, 2022.